Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Noble Helium's July webinar this morning. Thank you for joining us. I'll be soon handing over to Shaun Scott, and he'll be followed by Andrew Garnett, who will speak to more of the technical side of the presentation. So you'll have the opportunity to ask questions throughout. We may or may not be able to get to every question today, but as per our last webinar, I'll be responding to every question that is received today. So I'll pass over to Shaun now.
Beautiful. Thanks, Gareth. And welcome everyone. I thought we just take the opportunity to have another webinar to hopefully address any questions that have come up out of all the recent exciting news that we've been able to produce around the expanded potential within the western margin in the shallow gas play in the Rukwa, and I guess also looking ahead to the bigger opportunities that we've got coming down the track. So basically that's the purpose of today, really, just to hopefully answer a lot of the questions that we've been getting in one session. And as Gareth said, we'll have the opportunity. We've already received quite a lot of questions, so hopefully most of them will be answered by this presentation. But the ones that aren't, we'll respond to, and to the extent we can't get through them all, we'll definitely get back to you. So with that, I'll hand over to Professor Garnett. He's going to go through all the technical information. Gareth, can we see more of the presentation up on screen?
So Andrew, I'll hand it over to you now. You've got the presentation.
So is the presentation up on the screen there, Gareth?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I just can't see it then.
I can see that. It looks like I'm muted.
I can hear you, Andrew.
You? Okay, I have a message on the screen that says I'm muted, but if you can hear me, I can go ahead. If I have a sudden paroxysm of coughs, Shaun, you'll have to step in. But let's see how we get on. Okay, we can just move on to the next slide. Thanks, Gareth. Perfect. Yeah. So this is just a quick. We showed this slide before, so I won't go too much into it. Just to recognise that this is just an incredible province. It's a province which is really unparalleled in terms of helium richness, and we're in a position where we have 100% licenses both west and east, as you can see there, and now increasing evidence of this of the richness that we're chasing. It's just that after the last exploration campaign with the two relatively shallow wells, the sort of realization of just how prospective and where the prospectivity is has really increased and improved. And so we'll just talk about that a little bit as we go through today. Next one, please, Gareth. Are we moving on? Oh, perfect. Again, this is just a recap on where we were. The map on the left is a very shallow map of this. We would normally call in oil and gas a drilling hazard, but this isn't oil and gas, and this stuff's worth significantly more. So what used to be something you'd case off and avoid is now something we're actually looking for. So it's quite novel for most of us who come from the oil and gas sector. We had gas bubbling, so it was basically overpressure. It was coming out. We had reasonable concentrations down to 2 and a bit %. You can see on the mud log there. You can see that the mud log doesn't really represent very well what the concentrations are. So there's a comparison in red there between the mud log ppm and the lab measurement ppm. So that's just a warning for when you're looking at mud logs in general, which are quite often they're presented in this type of presentation. But just be aware they always significantly underestimate the amount of helium or later on in hydrogen. So we've had a look at this, and we've seen these pretty high permeable and porous sands, and we've done a bunch of models that even at sort of 2% or less still looks like commercial flow is doable, so long as we can find this again and test it properly. Next one, please, Gareth. Again, this is the sort of setting. So this is what we were thinking just after the well was drilled. We put together this model of how it works and this potential gas cap route down shallow. And then as we were going through this, one of the technical folks, it probably Justin, because he has these off the wall ideas sometimes, and he says, well, this is unlikely to be the only one of a kind. So does this type of shallow gas occurrence exist somewhere else? And if it does, shouldn't we really firm that up before we just go ahead and drill a single appraisal? And that's actually pretty smart. So I've said in grey there, this sort of shallow play is the tip of the iceberg. It's clearly the early commercialization tip. The big stuff's down deeper. But the technical team have really got to grips with what's really happening here. Why is this shallow gas accumulation happening? And everything's sort of in favour for gas coming out of solution at this sort of depth and just hanging there in the highly porous sediments underneath seals when we have them. And so we've basically expanded our thinking, or at least the technical team has really expanded our thinking and looked down deeper. The next one, please, Gareth. Excuse me, I mean down south, down the margin, down the western margin. Gareth. Not clicking. So this is just a map of the western margin. So the question, do the conditions for shallow gas occur further down the western margin? The answer is yes. The conditions being the type of sediments, the type of structures, and the access to a deep fetch area where charge can come from and accumulate. So yes, it does occur down the margin. We now realize that the shape of the lake, the detailed shape of the lake, is inherently related to the deeper structural fault patterns. And so although we don't have too much data between Mbelele and Ngambwe in the south, we do have some. And we think we can chase this onshore shallow gas, low-cost play using a best low-cost shallow geophysics program, a new program. So we see quite a potential for a number of these pearls, if you like, to join up, and to cost very little to drill and appraise and develop. And the next image I show you will be focused on the Ngambwe shallow phenomena down there. That's this picture here. So this picture shows, if you look where it says DHI, so that would normally be direct hydrocarbon indicators. Now it's direct helium indicator, or possibly hydrogen indicator. In any case, it's a direct indication that gas is in the near surface. This is slightly offshore in this location, which is why the data is a little bit better, and also why it wasn't muted out. So we had a look at all this old data, and there's a number of these quite shallow things in terms of amplitude anomalies. They do conform, this one in particular does conform to structure, which is a sort of acid test. And then we think, well, that's a little bit offshore. So what happens to these as we go onshore? So if you that's a sort of 3D representation. So the fault actually trends onshore. So the zone behind that fault, which includes shallow gas in this area, then moves onshore. And it actually then coincides, if you do the next picture, Gareth, it then sort of coincides with where we also detected a bunch of helium anomalies in the soil gas surveys later on. So it's all lining up for this shallow gas to be far more common. This is the left-hand picture, so the little green dots are helium anomalies well above background. And so it's all lining up for that trend of these fault-controlled, very shallow gas accumulations connected to the fetch areas in the right and into the basin. They all line up. So rather than simply go and chase Mbelele, we better really fix these up so we can do a much more sensible campaign about a number of these things. All working out so far. So the next one, please, Gareth. So actually, once again, what we don't want to do is pile this thing on with traditional sort of oil and gas type costs and big, large seismic surveys in 3D and all the rest. And so the technical guys have been coming up with, well, this is much more like the very shallow geophysics world. So shallow seismic reflections and refraction surveys, electrical resistivity. Obviously, if you get a gas accumulation in the near surface, the resistivity of the subsurface increases quite significantly. So that would be a test for more gas accumulations. The seismic will help us with refining the structural picture. Should be quite quick. The cables are not, thousands of channels and several kilometers long. They're maybe a kilometer long at the most. Typical type of equipment you can find within universities or on the market quite easily. In fact, we're already sourcing that already. We've got the team at UDSM who really did excellent work for us the last time. We're ready to mobilize. So that particular little survey in August will really firm up targets of beyond Mbelele. And then Dermot, our CEO, is working on getting that final low-cost drilling and testing technology down pat, and that's looking extremely promising too so far. Next one, please, Gareth. So drilling and testing. So obviously we know Mbelele 1 as a target, but we'll finalise the other targets after that geophysical survey's been done. Those sort of quick look, cheap surveys. We expect the drilling of each well to be 2 or 3 days. It's a truck-mounted system for the most part, so it's up and down, a little bit of site prep, and then up to the next one, 2 or 3 days to relocate maybe. Then drill again and so on. The low-cost wellheads, which we've had a lot of help from some French colleagues, they're on order, ready to go. We think the flow testing time will be around about 10 days. It'll be predominantly off-rig, which means we can do like a leapfrog campaign of drill, leave it, test it while the rig's doing another well. So that means we've got a very efficient mob demob and a very efficient operation. So again, focusing on cost. A little bit more challenging with gas compositional analysis in this case. That's really because we've realised the presence of hydrogen is more significant than we thought it was. Just means compositional analysis is a bit more challenging, technically challenging. May take a little longer, but at least we're on top of it, and our colleagues in UDSM know exactly what to do. So we're just working that one out at the moment. But everything's sort of lining up pretty well. Next one, please, Garrett. I just thought I'd put a pause in here because we did release recently some information on hydrogen, and it's not so much that hydrogen presence in this area is a surprise to us. What was a surprise to us and what's taken quite a bit of unraveling is why there's so much of it, and does it make sense, or is it some bizarre instrument problem or not? And so rather than just jump into it, we've taken a lot of time and effort to figure out what's going on. And I know most of our investors here in the helium business, many will be familiar with hydrogen, but I'll just do a little bit of background on hydrogen and then say how that picture is working up. So this is a typical story we have here on helium. So we're all familiar with this. It's effectively uranium decay, sometimes thorium decay, alpha particle. What we need to get that working is rich in uranium, which we have. We need a lot of time. We've got very old basement here, and actually a sediment karoo sitting on top of it for 250, 300 million years. You need a lot of groundwater mixing, which we have because of our tectonics. You need the right pressure, depth, and temperature to get as much helium solubility as possible. We have that, and then we have mechanisms to get the flow from where it occurs up into these traps. And preferentially, we're talking about traps in sedimentary rocks, because ultimately you can almost always crack some basement and find some hydrogen or helium in there. The problem will be making that flow, as those of you from the oil and gas industry know. So what we're really chasing is these sedimentary, high porosity, high permeability traps, and therefore we need a mechanism. So this is the other side of the coin now. So actually almost the same mechanisms are responsible. So radioactive decay is responsible for the producing of hydrogen through natural radiolysis. It's effectively radiation splitting water. Again, we've got the right things in place. We've got natural radioactivity in the basement, quite a lot of it. We've actually got some in the sediment too, which is evidenced from a uranium mine to the south in Malawi. We've got a lot of time again, a lot of chlorine, and again, the same migration mechanisms. So that's the hydrogen mechanism, which we pretty well knew about and was pointed out by the Uni Oxford and I think Uni Durham people who did the basin modeling for us. They pointed out that this is a real reality. We've also got this other mechanism though, which is called serpentinization. So this is effectively, if you've got the right rocks, old ocean plate, iron rich, under the right temperatures and pressures, then you get chemical reactions with groundwater under the right temperature and pressure, which produce considerable hydrogen, and actually magnetite, which is a highly magnetic mineral, which lends itself to geophysical detection. So we weren't quite sure about whether we had the right ingredients for this. And obviously it would add another source mechanism for hydrogen. So we've been doing a lot of work on figuring out whether this is a real thing that we have here. So a bunch of studies. This is the well log of Mbelele 2. The white line there is hydrogen, hydrogen concentrations in ppm. It's in the hundreds of ppm. The background hydrogen for reference in the atmosphere is 0.5 ppm, so it's significantly elevated above atmospheric background. Very interestingly, you'll see there's a There's a lot in the subsurface where we have all these porous zones. Roughly speaking, on that background picture, the wash, there's a sort of a sandy color. That's typically porous sandstone. The grayish color is less permeable, silty and shaly rocks. So quite interestingly, what we have here is some buildup of hydrogen, high hydrogen readings sitting underneath the sort of gray zone, which effectively is a seal zone. Doesn't mean it's free gas, but it does mean there's a mechanism there which is concentrating hydrogen in the porous zones and sealed. It's got potentially sealed. So the next one, please, just click, I think, of the animation on this slide, Gav. Yeah. So again, we're looking for the ingredients. It's a bit like putting a menu together. So do we have the right basement terrain? So that ultramafics I mentioned before, we actually knew, and we've looked at that in quite some detail, that we had them to the northwest of the lake, just tens of kilometers to the northwest. We've actually found some also to the southeast of the lake. So there's a sort of trendology going on. You lose the outcrop, obviously, under the lake, so we don't have outcrop. So we've been spending a lot of time figuring out what it is. That's what this picture is. If you look carefully at this picture, there's two sort of, in the top left-hand corner, there's two stars. It says outcropping iron-rich mafic and ultramafic CZS, which is the cheesy shear zone. And then you can see that this trend of high magnetism flows and into the lake. So the lake is actually where the magnetic data looks fuzzier. It's effectively fuzzier because it's buried under modern sediment, but it's still there. So we see this iron-rich material, magnetite-rich material heading off under the lake. So the mechanism for serpentinization probably exists under the lake. And it actually also exists in an area where the updip is always towards the western side, which is Mbelele 2. And then noted also at the bottom of the side of the Helium 1 well, where they reported 2.2% hydrogen. I don't know how they got that number. That's just a report which is in the public domain. So everything's there for both natural radiolysis and for serpentinization in terms of double the mechanism. And so the hydrogen story is really maturing up. So then they ask the question, of course, so what? Can you do anything? Can you do anything with it? And the obvious answer is you usually make urea with it. Normally you'd make it from going from natural gas first, which of course adds price. But it's a pretty standard technology, making ammonia or urea from hydrogen. There's some numbers there on the left, which basically says Tanzania is extremely short of fertilizer, and 90% imports. They're using a third less than is recommended by the various food bodies in the UN. And then the prices absolutely went skyrocket between pre-invasion 2021 and post-invasion 2022, which has happened globally, actually. And so there's actually a desperate need for urea in Tanzania, actually in East Africa generally. So price competitive. So it's difficult to find production costs for white hydrogen or natural hydrogen. There's a couple of references there which I picked up, pretty low. Green hydrogen, which is the electrolysis of water into hydrogen, that's obviously a lot more expensive. And the sort of standard model on the right is grey from methane, but of course it's both expensive and it's also CO2. So scale, yeah, you don't need a lot to make a useful urea business. About 50 tons a day urea as a standard modular plant, pretty small, but you can do that. It's about 2 million scots a day. Would take the input a little bit less probably. So then the real question is, can we get that sort of flow rate? So the answer is probably from our high porosity permeability formation. So we think the gross gas flow rate is in the range of our estimates. What we don't know yet is the percentage of hydrogen which is in that gross gas. And of course, that's what we've got to find out through the next stages after we've done our geophysics and we've done our testing, which is a little bit why I mentioned before, the compositional analysis is so critical and tricky. Once we've got the stuff flowing, we're going to spend a lot of time on making sure we have the numbers right. But essentially, we've got the right sort of formations. We've got the right background for hydrogen mechanisms. We've still got the helium mechanism, which is actually much more valuable, obviously, which is an add-on. But it's becoming complicated, but more interesting, I would say, more commercially interesting, I think. And then just finally, just to go back where we were, that on the top left-hand corner of this cross section is what we're talking about. It's just this gassy margin, as we call it now, string of these appraisal targets and the gassy margin. But that I've just put this up really because it's actually only a small percentage of still what the real main percentage is, what the main value is, which is in the deeper western and eastern margins where we have bigger traps under higher pressure which would have both richer concentrations of helium, but also much higher flow rates. And so we go into the shallow margin area, of course, because there's a quick and low cost way to develop and get some early cash flow. But let's not lose sight of the big prize, which is down deep for later. Next one, thanks. Yeah. Excuse me. I think I'll hand over to Shaun here, if that's okay, Shaun, while I drink.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Al. Appreciate the trying conditions for you. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly developing into a very exciting story, and with a couple of elements to it in terms of there's this short-term, hopefully quick to market monetization strategy with the shallow gas opportunity we've identified, and then obviously the massive upside potential of these deeper targets as well. But I think it's fair to say all the work we've done so far says this is the right address. We're in the right place. And I think with our first mover advantage and the acreage position we've got, we've actually also got the best house in the best street. So we're in a great spot. In terms of the sort of forward plan, obviously the shallow stuff is where we're going to be testing in the short term for the rest of this year. And I think Al's kind of been through that so far. Our objective is to try and narrow down the 8 potential leads that we've got into 5 targets that we can drill, including Mbelele 1. Potentially some of those targets that we've identified will merge into one bigger structure, but obviously that shallow geophysics work that the University of Dar es Salaam are going to do for us will help to frame that all up and identify those targets. Definitely a very simple, low cost and effective project that we've got now. As Al said, we've been really assisted greatly by the French guys who have done a very similar program themselves in the last couple of years, and so we've learned a lot from what they've done, and we're applying that now in terms of wellhead design and a number of other things that we're going to do. So expect it to be a pretty quick and effective program, and as Al said, it'll be a leapfrog sort of style approach where once we've done the geophysics work, firmed up the new targets, we'll mobilise the rig to site. It'll do the first wellhead will go on, and then while that testing starts, we'll relocate to the next site, get started on that next wellhead, and so on from there. So we expect that Dar es Salaam, University of Dar es Salaam guys will be out in the field in August. Probably it's a 5 to 6 week program, hopefully for them, and that will mean rig will be mobilising to site in September, and we expect to have all of the drilling and the testing underway and done by the end of October. Expectations for this year's start of the wet season is that we've got until early December anyway. Comfortably, and given the size and shape of the equipment that we've got, it's certainly much more easily moved and manageable than the big rig that we used for the original exploration wells last year. So yeah, that's all looking really good. I mean, longer term, as Al said, this is the shallow stuff's a great potential short-term monetisation program for us, but the next step will obviously be a fair bit of work in terms of turning that into something real from a commercialisation perspective. I've just kind of laid out there what we'd expect the sort of plan to be around the development of the plant that we're going to use. Obviously, the hydrogen component has added a new little bit of complexity to that. So we'll see what sort of form that takes as we understand this more and see where the real value proposition exists. But expect that all things going well, by the end of this year, we'll be in a position to pull the trigger on starting a project, getting all of the equipment that we need manufactured. Compressors seem to be the long lead item at the moment, but our expectation would be that all things going well, by middle of 2026, we'll be up and running and making some money if this all unfolds how we hope it will. And then, of course, the deeper stuff, that's the really orders of magnitude bigger proposition. Our planning's underway already to do a much more comprehensive seismic and drilling program on the eastern margin of the basin. We're in discussions with a number of parties around coming into that to fund it, because obviously it's going to be quite a substantial funding requirement for that. But the opportunity and the payoff and the payback from the size of the opportunity here means that there's quite a bit of scope to negotiate. And obviously the thing that's fantastic, just come back to it again, is that, you know, we own pretty much all the acreage, and we've now identified the opportunity and that this is the right place to be. And so really the only entry point for people who want to get in is coming in with us with the acreage that we already hold. The other bit of work that we've got going at the moment is a revised resource estimate. That's in progress, and that's obviously a combination of all of the additional data and work that we've been able to do over the last 6 to 9 months. Now bringing that all together and working with Netherlands Soil to come up with a revised resource estimate. So expect to see that out in the next month or two. So that's really it. Hopefully we've answered I think a lot of the questions that have come in, but obviously happy to field any others that have come. I know there were some that we received in advance, Gareth, so if you wanted to just run through those, happy to.
Yeah, so if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll bring both parties back on.
Yep.
And just have our faces, if you like.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, I'd like to think that a lot of the questions we received ahead of the webinar were answered, but I will highlight a number of questions that participants have issued this morning. First one, what is the catalyst that will get the off-taker partners onboarded?
Yeah, so as we've said on a number of previous occasions, we've obviously been talking to various parties for a long time, and they're very interested in what we're doing in Tanzania for a whole range of reasons. You know, geopolitical diversity, the fact that it's primary helium production, etc. So they're all there and they're keen. And then it's really just going to be a matter of demonstrating that we've got sufficient volume and production potential to justify the investment that's going to be required to build the downstream plant. Really, that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully, through the appraisal program, we'll be able to gather all of that data that satisfies them, and then they can go through their own internal approval processes. Obviously, negotiate the final arrangements in terms of how much they're going to pay us and all of those nice things. So yeah, we're quite close to that, and they're certainly on board with this initial approach in terms of the shallow gas. Even though it's relatively small in the scheme of things, it's still highly valuable, and they're more than happy to proceed to do this in a bit of a staged, modular stepping stone way.
Okay, so that's probably the most asked question. This would probably represent the second most asked question from participants. When will you declare a discovery?
Yeah, so again, that's one of the outcomes that we would expect out of this appraisal program. There's certain criteria that you need to meet under the rules to declare a discovery, and obviously flowing gas to surface is one of them, and that's obviously an objective of this program. So we would expect that will be part of what happens over the next few months.
I'll cobble together a few questions which sound quite similar. There's quite a few companies entering the race to supply helium, including into the US, which is a critical helium market. How might the potential success of these impact global helium prices and Noble's ability to negotiate offtakes with funding?
Okay. Well, I think that there's a few limbs to that. Whoever's asked that question is absolutely right. I mean, helium is becoming recognised as being much more important, and it's on the radar for a lot of people, and it is important, and it's a critical industrial gas in a range of applications, and I think from a market perspective, it's definitely growing very quickly. So there's definitely scope to accommodate more players into the market, and there's massive appetite for what we're doing in terms of the geopolitical diversification and the primary helium play. But the other point about it, when you think about it in reverse, is that our first mover advantage in terms of Tanzania, which, from everything we've seen and all the work we've done looking at this globally, is the next big helium province, and we've got our foot on all of the good acreage. So I think those things kind of work in two ways. One, appetite for people to get involved, interest in trying to find helium, pricing, all of that sort of stuff, has meant there's more demand for what we've got, including access to that acreage position.
Okay,
anything to add to that?
No.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, the next one is a two-part question in a way. Should the company be spending any more money on the project before a gas off-take agreement is reached, and then with the government? It's a two-part question, I suppose.
Well, so tackling the government part first, we obviously have licenses with the government to explore, and on successful exploration, you have the right to then convert those into production licenses or mining licenses, and there's a formula that exists in terms of how the government become involved in that. It's a 16% free carried interest, and it's not negotiable. It is the outcome that you'll end up with. So I don't think there's any issue in terms of where we sit with the government in terms of the work we're doing now. In terms of spending more money before the offtake, well, unfortunately, without the additional information that we need to gather through this appraisal program, which obviously costs money, we can't attract an off-taker. So that's where we're at.
Next question is perhaps for Professor Garnett. What flow rates and helium concentrations observed during the EWT at Mbelele would you hope to see before you can declare it to be commercial and begin arranging funding to commercial production?
That's a good question, and sadly it's not an easy one. Clearly, if you think about it in two dimensions, one is the sort of gross gas flow rate. So whatever's in the gas, it will flow it will behave like a single phase. So there's a gross gas flow rate dimension, and then there's always a percentage helium dimension, and both of those are somewhat uncertain at the moment. And so obviously the higher percentage helium, you can live with lower gross gas rates. So without giving you the exact numbers, our modeling shows so far that the gross gas flow rates, which we think we can get from these very cheap, although it will be low in oil and gas terms, but they've got to bear in mind these very cheap shallow wells, that the gross gas flow rates will be achievable. And so then we're into the percentage helium space, and our percentage helium from the work we've done so far look like it's on track for being commercial. So it won't be that one well will be commercial. It will be a development of a few of these cheap wells, but a few of these cheap wells at a very small percentage of helium looks like it's going to be commercial for what we're doing.
Look, there were a number of questions with regard to the hydrogen potential, and I think the presentation, well, I'd like to think the presentation has answered most of those. I will be circling back around and providing written responses to the hydrogen potential. Further to that, back to helium, the shallow gas potential seems very high on the western margin. Is there a resource target for this potential?
I'm not sure I understand that. I don't understand the question.
I've just read it as it's been submitted. I suppose, can you talk, is there a resource target that binds together the potential of all the wells that you're talking about?
I understand.
The helium potential across the western and eastern markets.
Got you. Yeah. So in gross gas terms, you're in the tens. So let's say if you have an Mbelele lookalike, and again, we haven't had the numbers fully audited yet by NSAI, but so we're in the tens to small hundreds of BCF gross would be a guess. So the answer is there is a target for resource potential, but actually flow rates are much more important than static volumes in terms of cash flow. And so it's a little bit the way we think in gas, because in natural gas, because we're sort of used to it and we can easily do, TCF of gas into a commercial, but actually for us, it's flow rates are much more important than very large volumes of gas, because the equation changes when the value per scuff per day is so high. So it's not an easy question, but we're if these things come in, we're happy that there's commercial target ranges for both gross gas and net helium.
Yeah, I think, Gareth, just to add to that, I mean that's one of the beautiful things about helium. It's such a high value commodity that the size of the accumulation that you need in terms of what you expect the recoverable helium to be can be quite small. Let's just say it's a BCF of recoverable helium across everything that we find there. You're still talking an in situ sort of value of 700 or 800 million Aussie dollars. So it's still a substantial and high value situation, as opposed to if it was a conventional gas project. Obviously, if it was a BCF recoverable, you wouldn't even look at it because the revenue line's a tenth of that. So what we need to find, the flow rates that we need to achieve, the helium percentage that we have, and the cost to actually do it all, obviously all go hand in hand. But the threshold, I guess, that you need to meet here is very, very low, given the high value of the commodity.
And I suppose summing up, which is a question, what is it about, Professor Garnett, what is it about the geology that has you so excited about the potential of the project and the acreage, I suppose? It is a very rare, phenomenal geology, if you could sum it up.
It is. There's a reason that the African Rift Basin is a sort of textbook classic. It's generally because it's the most active, most well understood, most studied one in the world. What gets you excited? It's not that there aren't other rifts around. So rifts give you lots of things. They give you the basement exposure and the radioactivity, and in our case, they give us the potential for serpentinization. They also give you a bunch of sediments in lakes that you stick on top of that for trapping things in. It's like putting a big sponge on top of a tight rock, with plenty of potential for structuration because of the very active tectonics. So that sort of exists in other places too. Although the difference in the African Rift Basin at the moment is it's currently still active, and so these pressures and tectonics, which are forcing the rich groundwaters to mix into the shallower groundwaters, those are ongoing. And this is why one of the reasons that, in addition to the high levels of uranium and so on, but that all stuff comes together to make it rather extraordinary. You can imagine that some of the provinces over in the US 100 million years ago were quite similar in terms of richness, but they're not so active anymore. So it's just a special place. And Justin, who's a founder of he had a bunch of experience with this whole trapping phenomena up in the north, and he's brought that lessons down. Up in Kenya, he's brought those lessons down to Tanzania. So they're sort of all coming together. The necessary deep geology for helium, and for that matter hydrogen now, the necessary deep geology for helium, and then the necessary shallow geology and tectonics to get it out of the basement and into some traps that will flow. And that's pretty unique.
Well, I think that's a good note to finish on. Thank you for your participation today. Excuse me, I know you weren't 100%. I'm confident we've answered most of the questions we've received. Obviously, I'll be circling back around with written responses to every question that we've received within the next couple of days. So all questions will be answered. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. There will also be a recording shared on socials and on our website that people will be able to access after the event. So that brings everything to a closure. Thank you for your participation today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Alf.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.